Welcome to MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 549. A special Gimmel Tammuz edition, being that today is Gimmel Tammuz. This program is dedicated in loving memory of Miriam Bas Eliyahu Altes Aleh HaShalom, and in merit of Baruch ben Yamin ben Menucha Lana Altes, Yikusil ben Leah Rachel and Rachel Bas Liba Farkash, dedicated by Pinchas Taders ben Miriam and Sarah Bas Rachel Altes. It's also dedicated to our brothers and sisters, our brethren, men, women, and children in Eretz Yisrael, and especially to the idea of the soldiers who sacrifice their lives to protect them. Hashem should protect them all. Hini le'yonim v'le'yishin Shem Yisrael. God protects every Yid everywhere, especially in Eretz Yisrael. Hashem lekecha b'am resh Hashanah v'ad achar Hashanah. Special providence, the land of Israel that God watches over all year round. We should have a complete nitzachon against our enemies, and above all, going right into Moshiach Gili of the Gula Hamitis V'Ashlema B'Yedei Moshiach Tzidkenu. So let's begin Gimmel Tammuz. Very difficult day to talk about. Very difficult day because what does it really mean? What does this day signify? We know it's a day where, on a physical level, there's a concealment. The Rebbe, Neshama Beguf, not revealed any longer to us, meaning the Neshama was elevated, as the Lashon is Talkus, Hilula. And ever since, we're talking now 31 years, Tafshin Nun Daled, now we're in Tafshin Pei Hei. It's a long time, 31 years. So the best way, as the Frierdiker Rebbe said, difficult to speak, but even more difficult to be silent. The best way to categorize it is in the events that happened on Gimmel Tammuz many years ago, thousands of years ago, in the Sefer Yeshua, Shemesh Begiven Daim. And that day, Yeshua davened that it should be, it was the middle of a battle and a war, the Shemesh and Given should be Daim silent. And as the commentaries explained, the sun stopped in order for them to continue fighting and winning the war. So on one hand, the sun was shining. On the other hand, it stopped. And when you think about it, that paradox captures the essence of Gimmel Tammuz. Alter Rebbe says in Ageres HaKedesh that Moshe Rabbeinu is like a shemesh, the Gemara says, K'pnei shemesh, K'pnei chama, like a sun. And when the sun sets, on one hand, it's not shining, but on the other hand, it is. Because the sun doesn't really go away. It's just shining in a different part of the world. We discovered a few years ago a manuscript from the Mittler Rebbe where he elaborates on this mashal. And as he says there, it shines through the stars. But it's not a direct shine to those that were in the area where the sun was shining directly. Gimmel Tammuz is a similar idea. On one hand, the shemesh always remains. Just as he stood and Meshamish served as a Rebbe, so he continues to do so. As we know, that Adar, as the Alter Rebbe says, in some ways the Neshama is even more because it's not limited to a body. So it's more present than ever. But yet there is a certain concealment. Something has stopped. And because the Rebbe gave us instructions on Chof Ches Nissen, Tafshin Nun Aleph, 3 years before Gimmel Tammuz, a little more than 3 years, that I've done everything I can, obviously that stopping is only on condition that we do something. Like the Rebbe said in Gimmel Shvat Tafshin Nun Aleph as well, that when a Rebbe, he spoke about Moshe Rabbeinu, is unable to speak, has a stroke, then that we who listen to him have to be his mouthpiece, his arms and legs, shluchas shalom kamesei, to continue the work that the Rebbe taught us and educated us. And that itself is ma'azari b'chaim afu b'chaim. As his children are alive, that's how he comes alive. As the Rebbe in a classic, powerful Sikha, Yud Shvat, Tafshin Chof Hei, spoke about this at length, how ma'azari b'chaim afu b'chaim, the Tafshin Chof Hei or Tafshin Chof Vov, that the Rebbe spoke about, that it's up to us to bring alive the Mahu B'chaim, through Zari B'chaim. So we have a job to do. So I don't have an answer or explanation for Gimmel Tammuz, but we know what we have to do as a result. Intensify our work, and for every concealment and for every challenge, we have to become even more powerfully committed. And especially today when we see a wake-up call, unprecedented in the world. You talk about B'Shefer Gadol, the expression that Rebbe used from the Pasuk, of the 6-day war, we see that now, a wake-up call, with events that have happened in Iran, the miracles in Eretz Yisrael. So we have to respond to this wake-up call. That's what the Rebbe gave us the work to do. In many ways, this very program is an outgrowth of that as well. So it's seeking ways to fill, I don't want to say the void, but to reveal the Rebbe's presence and the Rebbe's work, the Rebbe's legacy. And of course, this is Hashem's work and Hashem's legacy, but through his shliach, through the Moshe of the generation. And the fact that so many years have passed, 31 years, doesn't change the reality of the nischias, of the eternity of the message. It just makes it even more incumbent upon us and behooves us even more to intensify. And we always have to see, as the Rambam says, that one good deed, that one additional good deed, good word, good thought, will tip the scales and bring tshuva v'atzalah, geula to each one of us and to the entire world. So that's an overall perspective on Gimmel Tammuz. So how do we honor this day? We honor this day through actions. It's not just about thoughts, not nostalgia, sadness. It's about actions. Our commitment, our dedication, that we are an extension of the rays of the sun, and we have to bring that sun everywhere we go. In the form of Hafotzas HaYadus, Hafotzas HaTeira v'Yadus, spreading and disseminating Teira and Yiddishkeit, Hafotzas HaMayonis Chutza, which Moshiach told Baal Shem Tov is the way that Moshiach will come. That's how we honor this day. We honor this day by learning the Rebbe's Teira. We're learning especially Teiras HaGeula, around Geula, because the more you're aware of it, the more it's conscious and present and realistic in our lives, envisioning what the world and our lives will look like when Moshiach comes, and bring it into action, living Moshiach. Moshiach came to visit and stayed in your house. What would your house look like? What would your work look like? What would your life look like? That's how we honor this day. So someone asked the question, why do we say that the presence of a tzaddik is stronger than after they pass away? More than when they were alive. So the Alter Rebbe explains that's an expression in the Zohar. And the Alter Rebbe explains, being that the avodah of a tzaddik, the ikar life of a tzaddik, is what? It's not chaim psarim, it's not life of flesh and blood and physical life, biological life. But what? It's ruchni, chaim ruchnim, which is ava and yira and amunah. Love and reverence of God and amunah and faith. That does not die, God forbid. On the contrary, when the neshama is in the body, it's limited to the space where it's located. When the neshama is not confined by the body, then that spreads, and especially to the students and those disciples that receive from the tzaddik, from the Rebbe. That's why shtakich yatir. Still, we want a neshama beguf, we want it manifest, we want to relate to it, but there is an element because it reveals more that infinite presence. So when Tzimtzum Shchinte ben Shnei Ba'adei Odin, yes, the Eibishter concentrated and channeled his presence between the two poles, between the two pillars that held up of the Odin. And that's why the Eibishter spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu. But then there's the concept of Malei Kol Aretz Kvedei. The Eibishter is everywhere. So we want it not present, but in a certain way, it doesn't have that confinement, and that's the Shtachich Yatir. And when we do the work that we've learned from the Rebbe, we learn his Torah, and we continue to be a student and continue to perpetuate what we've learned and bring it into action, then we manifest that very presence in our lives and the lives of everyone around us. What was the Rebbe's last major teaching before Zayin, Adar, and Gimmel Tammuz? Which led to Gimmel Tammuz. And can we view that teaching as a directive for what our generation needs to do now, just as we view the Basel Lagani maamar as the Frierdiker Rebbe's directive for what he wanted the next generation to focus on? Answer is absolutely yes. And remember, Basel Lagani was the first maamar that Rebbe said. And he said, what did he say in the maamar? That we are the Deir Ashvi, the seventh generation. That is the message from the beginning of the Rebbe's leadership, including to the end, and not the end of the Rebbe's leadership, but the end of the Rebbe's last words to us. I mentioned Chof, Ches, Nis, and Tafshinun Aleph. But through that period in time, all the way till the last Vabrein, Vayakel, Tafshinun Beis, the Shabbos before that Monday, Chav Zayin Adar, that was the underlying message, that the Gula is right upon us. We only have to open our eyes. Higiyazman Gulaschem, the time of Gula has arrived. And many such expressions. That was the last marching orders. There are many lessons that Rebbe spoke in Vayakel, for example, Tavshinu Beis, that Rebbe spoke about Achdus Yisrael, unity. But the real driving directive was no question. I did everything I can, now do everything you can to bring the Gula Moshiach. And that is the message. And interesting, it's not just the last words, it's the first words as well, as the Rebbe, Basel Lagani, as I said, Tavshin Yud Aleph. So whatever the Rebbe directed us to do, it's channeled through, and the ultimate goal is crossing the finish line, and we do that through Masene Vavadesenu, through our work, and the work that the Rebbe gave us, each one in our own shlichus. Shliach with Eser Keches equals Moshiach, as the Rebbe explains, beginning from Simchas Teda, Leil Simchas Teda, Tavshin Memvav, 1985, the night of Simchas Teda, before the Hakofis. So a shliach, each of us is a shliach, but a shliach is just the person. Then you have to actualize it. Eser Keches, when we actualize our shlichus through our 10 faculties, shliach with 10 equals Moshiach. What maamar of the Rebbe would you recommend we study on this day? Hello, Rabbi Jacobson. As we're getting closer to Gimmel Tammuz, I'm eagerly looking into what I can do to prepare for such a holy day. I was thinking of perhaps learning a Mugadik maamar from the Rebbe. Do you have any recommendations as to which Mugadik maamar would be best suit Achana for Gimmel Tammuz? So being that's already Gimmel Tammuz, and I'm sure you've already learned the maamar, but being that we're still talking about it, so there are the different maamarim. There are maamarim that the Rebbe gave out and edited for Gimmel Tammuz. So I would suggest any one of those maamarim is very fitting. There's the Rebbe's maamar on Lahav and Inyan Tchias HaMesim, also a very fitting maamar. The truth is, I wouldn't say there's actually one maamar. Of course, Ata Tetzaveh, Tavshin Mamal, the Rebbe gave out, and the last maamar the Rebbe distributed, it talks about Moshe Rabbeinu, talks about the challenges of our times. So that may be the maamar that many people associate with. Any of the above really work, and they're all anon nafshik sovis yahavis, which means the Rebbe invested his soul into the writing, as the Rebbe brings often. Tzaddikim deim lebeirim, just as the Eibusha invested his soul, his nafshis, and non nafshik sovis yahavis, so to every tzaddik and every Rebbe into his Torah. Okay. I would say the Sicha of Chof Ches Nissen, Tavshinun Aleph, Chai Sora, Tavshinun Beis, the last Sicha that Rebbe spoke, Leisato, to the Shluchim, Kinus HaShluchim, is also very fundamental. And I would also add Vayeshev Tavshinun Beis, where he talks about the whole global vision and how we're finishing the work and how things have changed over the years, that now we're ready to be Mavada the whole world, including France, including the Western world. So those are also sikhs I would strongly recommend that capture very much the essence and of the Chiddush of the Rebbe to learn on Gimmel Tammuz, and frankly all year round. Manishtana Gimmel Tammuz Hazeh, Mikola Gimmel Tammuzim of the last 30 years. Is there anything significant in the number 31? Well, being that Hayom Meilin is kind of a Nasim, which is, we don't like to use that word maybe on Gimmel Tammuz because it's used on Purim, it's used on Yom Tevim, but still, there's a certain energy of Gimmel Tammuz that affects us all. And as a result, every year is that same energy, but with a new emphasis. The Alter Rebbe says in the Geras Hakedesh 14 in Tanya, the fourth section of Tanya, chapter, the section 14, that every year there's a Eir Chodesh. Now the reason I'm hesitant is because what is the Eir Chodesh here exactly of Gimmel Tammuz? But on the positive note, the Eir Chodesh is the work we do as a result of Gimmel Tammuz. So every year we have to add an increase in it. And as long as we don't have the results, the work continues. So instead of really trying to explain what 30 years is, 31 years, I would just say that every year we have to increase. Of course, there are the Muslim, I'm sure I can rely on others to figure out what's Lamed Aleph, by Shleishim Shana. So the Rebbe did mark special dates, like a decade, 3 decades. But again, I leave that for others. I'll just say that let's add and increase. And it shouldn't be any more time, any more delays. And it's finally the time. So when I hear the number 30, 31, what I think of is it's high time. It's overdue. And as a result, we have to increase our work. And that's what we do. There's plenty of work to be done. We don't have to rely on us to finish it all, but we still have to make that extra effort to tip the scales. Are there guidelines on how to pray the Ohel to realize the best results? Well, the guidelines we have is from the Rebbe. We know we write a note upon, we tear it up by the Ohel. The saying the minor Lashon, booklet the Rebbe prepared that we say the Ohel. And of course, speaking from your heart, pouring out your heart. That's really what's expected. The reverence, the respect, and all the other customs which you can look up when you go to the Ohel is all part of it. Beyond that, obviously every person has to make their hachanas, their preparation, going to the mikveh beforehand, and different customs that people have in regard to that. As far as best results, it's like every tefillah. Not to diminish or to minimize. It's all about kavan, intention. Every tefillah, when you say the proper tefillah, Hashem listens and Hashem responds. But I guess this leads to the next question. Why do some people see their prayers fulfilled more than others? Why do many people down by the Ohel and see miraculous positive results, but I never see answers for the things I need? And I'm not being petty when I daven for an increase in parnassus so I can be secure and be able to pay my bills, and yeshiva tuition for 2 children without having to worry and have stress. What should I do differently when I go to the Ohel in order to see the same positive results many others see? In general, we don't try to compare ourselves to others. Everyone has a personal relationship with the Rebbe, a personal relationship with Hashem. The Rebbe intervenes upon us, for us, I should say, with Hashem. We don't know what's going on in other people's lives. What you see is with your eyes. We don't know other things that are happening. The bottom line is you need to know is that you have a direct line. And we don't compare. And direct line, you have to do what you have to do. When Hashem and how Hashem responds, that's up to God. But the same question can be asked about all prayers, not just regarding the Ohel. Sometimes it doesn't seem like we got the answer we thought we should get. Maybe Hashem has a better answer for us. Maybe there's a certain moment in time when it will happen. You know, Chassidus brings from the Baal Shem Tov that sometimes the bracha has to come in one area, and it comes and not the other area that we've asked for. Now that doesn't mean we can't ask. We should always ask with sincerity, with full faith and full betachon and trust. But this already goes in the domain of the areas that we do our part and Hashem will do His part. I wouldn't start pointing fingers that you did something the wrong way. First of all, none of us are perfect, and we all do things that are not always perfect. Rachmana libabai, the Eibishter wants our heart. Be as sincere as possible, be open, be vulnerable, and Hashem will respond. And it should happen as soon as possible, b'teva nirav anigla, in a revealed way. Is there a connection between Gimmel Tammuz and Parshas Korach when it took place? Just as Korach challenged Moshe Rabbeinu, the leader of the time, Gimmel Tammuz in a way challenges. But it seems like a bigger challenge was with the case with the Sfarim that challenged who the Sfarim belonged to. So first of all, there's no contradiction. Absolutely, this was pointed out all the way back. I remember thinking about it, speaking about it, that Gimmel Tammuz happened with Motzei Shabbos, Parsha Korach, and Motzei Shabbos, Ohel, the Liyam Arishin, to the first day of the week of Parshas Chukas. Korach challenged Moshe, Madu tisnasu. Why did you raise yourself up? Kol ha'edei kedeshim hem. The whole nation, the whole community are holy. We don't find an exact answer actually in the Parsha. We just say that that Hashem chose Adam. He chose Moshe. And the proof for Adam, the story with the Shkedim, how the Hashem says, test it, see whose Shkedim, whose almond branch grows. And it was proven that Adam was the chosen. And similar, Hashem clearly made Moshe the chosen one. So there are different explanations what was Korach's intentions and what the response was. But bottom line is, Hashem chose Moshe Rabbeinu. But there was a challenge. And the way Gimmel Tammuz, the Einei Basar, Das Tachten, when we look at it, the Rebbe is physically not here, so it's a challenge. But remember the end of the story. The end of the story is that we have to dig deeper and deeper iskashus and deeper connection and show that he is here. And he's present through our work, through our lives, and so on. And it leads right into Chukas. What's Chukas? The story of Chukas? The story of Chukas is the story of Tuma Metaris Mes. Mes is a period, there's a separation between body and soul. As the Rebbe said, the Shleishim of the Rebbe Tzachai Mushke, Pasha Porah, Tovshim Memches, that Moshe brought them with medrash, that Moshe was shaken up when he saw Tumas Mes. He said, how are you going to purify from this? All the other taras he accepted, Tumas Zov, Tumas Nida, Tumas Mitzeda. When it came to Tumas Mes, Niskarkim upon Moshe, his face became pale, he became trembled. How will this be purified? And that's when the Eibishter said, Zeis Chukas Atera, Zeis, Marabetz Boy Vemazeh, here it is. Here's the solution. Whenever it says Zeis means it was a wonder, an amazement, and the Eibishter had to actually show him with his finger through the Parah Aduma, as Chassidus explains, the Rotze V'Shuv, that Mayim and Eish represent the water and the ash of the Parah of the red heifer, that brings back life. But the Rebbe asked the question that Tavshim Ches, why was Moshe surprised? The Eibishter can't find a way to purify. Just like this, the Hashem takes, Hashem gives the solution. But the Rebbe said, no matter how much you understand the idea of the nitzchias of the neshama, the eternity of the soul, tchias hamesim, how much we don't understand God's ways, still Moshe was disturbed because even for 1 second, the separation of body and soul, the heart, a pained heart, a bleeding heart, cannot be assuaged, cannot be consoled even with all the explanations in the world. And that's what Moshe was disturbed by. It's clearly the Rebbe was speaking about himself. So Chukas also talks about the paradox of separation, body and soul. But then again, the consolation that they come back together through our Aveda of Rotze V'Shuv, Eishamayim. What can we do to not feel depressed and threatened by today's world's events? To be sad and depressed by all the horrible world events going on, all the politics, and especially that since Gimmel Tammuz, we can't directly ask the Rebbe what to do about it. So firstly, we can ask. And we were given an answer. The Rebbe spoke about similar events and essentially said they're all challenges, correct, but we have to rise to the occasion. All the mifsoim of the Rebbe, the campaigns, I don't know if you know this, were a result of challenges in Eretz Yisrael mostly. Miftzat Tefillin came the 6-day war. Miftzat Mezuzah came after the attack, the terrorist attack, the killing of the children, Rahman al-San and Ma'alot. The same with all the Miftzayim. The response is action. More darkness, you need even more light to dispel the darkness. And the Rebbe's attitude, as the Rebbe said many, many, many times, famous like maamar, Chof Zayin, right before the 6-day war, that we stand strong and the complete amunah that the Eibishter will protect. So when you're bound above, you don't fall below. We have to connect ourselves even more with the Rebbe, with Torah, with the blessings and the promises in the Torah. And just look what happened now. Yes, there were casualties, unfortunately. But if you think about it, miracles mamish. That Israel, over 1,400 miles away, Iran, should go in there without one casualty, without one plane being shot down, without one military being affected. Yes, missiles fell in Eretz Yisrael, and unfortunately people died. We're still in Golus, that's very clear. But relatively speaking, how many were deflected? How many were destroyed? And everyone thought that Iran will be World War III. Nothing of the sort. So we shouldn't want and need to have all those miracles, but they did happen. So our approach has to be that with all the events in the world, like the Rebbe quoted the Yalkut Shmeini, when a Melech Poras, a Persian king, attacked a neighbor, an Arab king, but the same applies in general, as it says in other Midrashim and the Zohar, say Parsha Ve'era and other places. And the world gets frightened, and the Yidden come saying they're frightened. What's going to be? What will be? So the Eibishter answers, Bane al tisyoru, my children, don't be afraid. Kol ma shasisi, everything I did was b'shvilchem. Asisi, I did it for you. Higiya zman geulaschem. So the time of Geula has arrived. All these are signs of the Geula, as we've discussed in the last weeks. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah, Beis Omid Beis, that till Moshiach comes, there'll be Malchus Remi, Malchus Paras. Rome is the Western Christian world, descendants of Rome, descendant of Esav. Paras essentially is the general Ishmael's descendants. But like Tosfos says there, at the end, Rome, the Western world, will conquer Paras. And like it says in other places as well. So let's hope and pray that this is the last confrontation. And we march straight into the Geula. But regardless, it is our faith and our connection to something greater. You look at Jewish history, despite all odds that we're here. So how do you maintain not having fear? So we do everything that's prudent and practical, obviously. Protect ourselves. Fight the war that when it's necessary. But always remember that it's Eile beruch ve'eile basusim. They go with chariots and these with horses. But we go with the Shem Hashem, with the name of Hashem. And that's what gives us the strength. Utze eitze v'sufer, davar davar layokum ki imanu keil. The song that Rebbe would always encourage, especially in times when there were these challenges, that they make their plots and conspiracy, but we, ki imanu keil. Hashem eiz la'ame yitin, Hashem yivarach esame v'shalom. Hashem gives us strength. Ein eiz alatera. So it's our connection to Hashem, our connection through Torah mitzvahs that gives us the strength. Or else, yes, you become subject to the news and the events, which is not necessarily something we have to follow in every detail. But even if you do follow it, but you have to counter it all this negative news, with that connection. That's how we maintain strong. We maintain our strength. Can we say that the Rebbe is Moshiach after Gimmel Tammuz? I heard this concept that Hashem already appointed the Lubavitcher Rebbe as the actual Moshiach, so much so that there were Chassidim that did activities expressing that belief and they got favorable answers. How does this idea apply after Gimmel Tammuz when we can't see the Lubavitcher Rebbe physically anymore? So overall, you have to remember the Rambam. We don't just say any person's Mashiach. The The Rambam gives us criteria in Perek Yud Aleph, chapter 11 of Hilchos Malachim, at the end of Sefer Hayad. The Moshiach will be a person who will come from the house of David, Beis David, someone committed to Torah mitzvahs, influencing and inspiring others to do so, will fight the battle. And then the Rambam says, Harizeh, that makes him presumed to be Moshiach, Cheskes Moshiach, winning the battle, rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi, and Kabetz Nitzchis, and gathering together the Jews from all over. And Oz Epech, in all the world, the nations will be transformed. That makes him Moshiach Vadai. Moshiach Vadai is, I think, before the Oz Epech, if I recall correctly. So to say someone's Moshiach is not just something we get up, we don't nominate people, we don't elect. The Eibishter decides. But as the Rebbe quoted from Bartanura, from the Chassam Sefer, Sdei Chemed, and other places, then every generation, the Nasi of the generation is the Moshiach of the generation. And when the Eibishter is ready, just like with Moshe, Moshe was not the Redeemer of Eden until 80 years old when the Eibishter told him to now go to Mitzrayim and become Geil Rishon. When the Rebbe was asked about that, about being Moshiach, he says that the Eibishter that Moshiach himself doesn't know until the Eibishter tells him. But that the signs in the world, as the Rebbe said, is all ready for Geula and Moshiach. And this was all the given reality before Gimmel Tammuz. So obviously, everyone who knew what the Rebbe is assumed that the Rebbe is the one, the Cheskes Moshiach, that will lead us into Moshiach Vadai and the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash. Being that we don't yet have the Beis HaMikdash, so clearly it did not reach that level. So what happens after Gimmel Tammuz? So this has been a matter of debate. So in the Gemara, Sanhedrin says Moshiach can be also for someone that comes from the Min HaMesim, meaning someone that even after they passed. I don't want to go into this discussion right now because it's a matter of halachic questions and maybe we may not even have an answer. But those that truly believe that the Rebbe could be Moshiach feel the Rebbe can return and finish the job, so to speak. If someone says, how do you know it's the Rebbe Dafke? And they don't feel that way, fine. So find yourself a candidate, if you can't. The Eibishter is going to decide regardless. But above all, the big question that has to be asked is, what are we doing about it? It's not just about sensationalism, identifying someone. Whenever I'm asked, do you believe the Rebbe is Moshiach? I say, it doesn't matter what I believe. You ask Lahavla, Supreme Court Justice, do you believe in freedom of speech? The answer is, it doesn't matter what I believe. The Torah promises, the Constitution promises it, guarantees it, so I uphold it. Look in the Torah, look in the Rambam, study the Rebbe's life, that's what I say, and you decide. It's not up to us, it's up to Hashem. If the whole world does not accept a certain individual as Moshiach, but Hashem wants him to be, he will be, like Moshe. He wasn't accepted so easily. And if the whole world doesn't accept someone and the Eibishter wants him, he'll be. And vice versa. If the whole world nominates someone, the Eibishter says that's not him, he won't be. It's not up to democracy here. But above all, we're given a job is not to define who Moshiach is, but what are we doing about it? What are you personally doing? That's the focus. Will everyone in the world immediately know that Moshiach has arrived? When Moshiach comes, will everyone all over the world know about it immediately, even people living on remote islands without internet? Will everyone in the big cities know about it right away, but it will take a few months until the message gets out to everyone living in remote places all over the world? Well, first of all, with technology today, even though there are places, of course, it seems even naturally that everyone will know quite quickly. Secondly, the changes that will happen, even if they're natural changes, as the Rambam says, world peace, a higher state of consciousness. So I would say right now the world already is in a state of higher state. There's so many signs, as the Rebbe says, the Rebbe brings. Technology itself. If you open your eyes, there are many ways, so it's already out there. But the actual event, that this is it. So I think this news will spread very quickly, both technically, and also from the spiritual side of it. But it's an interesting question. I never thought of it practically in that way. But I would say, being that it's such a major event, the world will know. I mean, are there people in certain corners that don't know anything that's going on? Even they will know. Because like I said, even naturally, there will be changes in every person's life. But thank you for the question. Okay, now with that, let us move to a few more topics. Let's talk about the ceasefire between Israel and Iran. So when many questions and many comments came in, I'll just sum them up and say this as follows. Is this a positive thing, this ceasefire? Well, being that we don't know all the facts, which is always the case, so on one hand, you could say, yes, Israel has made it clear that they've achieved their goals, which is defanging Iran from its nuclear aspirations, defanging Iran the ballistic missiles. Did they illuminate every missile launcher? Most likely not. But Israel claims they did achieve their goals. On the other hand, you could say, maybe they were under pressure from President Trump, United States, who did call for unconditional surrender. Did Iran unconditionally surrender? Did they accept any terms? So is it really over? But it could be that they've been so weakened that it's clear to Israel, to the United States, that they will succumb and accept all the terms. So time will tell. You could, of course, argue both ways. But especially being that we don't know all the facts, maybe there are factors that are very clear that this is it, so to speak. So we have to assume it's possible. Regardless, we don't control the events, so we'll have to watch and wait and see. So, following up, what would the Rebbe say? Based on the Rebbe's teachings, would he be disappointed we ended the war with Iran without a complete victory? The Rebbe may have said to go all the way to Tehran with Israeli tanks, even as a symbolic gesture, just to show them who is boss and demoralize them to prove we won. Which means similar to what the Rebbe said during the Yom Kippur War, to go into Damascus and to Cairo. Not necessarily to stay, but just to show who is in control. But you could also argue that they did that not with going in with tanks, which would be more dangerous, but with the Air Force, completely controlling airspace and everything that came with that. So it's very hard to say what the Rebbe would say, whether we know all the facts or not, that you have to always be strong. That if this came out of weakness, or of like not finishing the job, that would be a big mistake. Because then what stops them just rebuilding? You haven't really finished. It would be like World War II ending without Germany fully surrendering and Japan fully surrendering. That was what the Rebbe would insist upon. But as I said, not sure, maybe we are there. So I want to be careful. I definitely have the instinct to say, is this happening again? That they don't go all the way the 100%. But Tag gut wird sein gut. Let's us hope that that's not the case. And this will be done. And the fact is, Israel's shown that it's acted. And in a miraculous fashion, Hashem has helped. That will be now the trajectory. And Iran will come to terms, will make peace, recognize Eretz Yisrael. Same with the other Arab countries. And this will be the beginning of a new era in a place that has been ravaged by wars for centuries, for millennia. Going back to Yishmael and Yitzchak in the house and tent of Avram Avinu. Even though we know that we can't trace exactly the Yishmael to each individual, but the general region and the Midrashim that Rebbe brought and the Zohar and so on, and the different psukim, that they went to Bnei Esav and Bnei Yishmael and offered them the Torah, and then what derived from them, and all the explanations behind that all. Is there a connection between Khamenei, that's the Imam, the leader of Iran, and Haman? Same letters. I'm not saying Ayatollah is a direct reincarnation of Haman. I would have no way to know that, but clearly, based on his violent actions, it seems the same archetype of Haman, pure irrational hatred. Well, I've discussed this a few, right when after the battles began, Persia then and now, because it is Persia then, Haman convinced Achashverosh, La'abed, to annihilate, God forbid, every Jew, and that's what Iran has been calling for. So there are many parallels. The location, Persia, of old Persia now, the name, and the end of the story. And Chof Gimmel Sivan, when Achashverosh signed the decree that the Yidden can defend themselves and destroy all their enemies, and indeed Chof Gimmel Sivan was right in this period, from Zayin Sivan to Chof Ches Sivan, interestingly, when the ceasefire was announced, those 12 days, so middle is Chof Gimmel Sivan, as we've also discussed. So that's the main thing, the ability and the actual elimination of all our enemies. And here on, only simcha and joy for Yidden and for all good people in the world. Did the Rebbe say that one way to defeat irrational hatred is by increasing an irrational love? Absolutely. The second Beis HaMikdash, we're told, was destroyed by sinas because of sinas chinam. Baseless hatred. And the tikkun the Rebbe says is avas chinam. Suprarational, baseless love. Even if you don't have a reason to love every Yid, to love every person. That's how we counter things. And ma'ater, even a little light, dispels much darkness. And definitely a lot of light. So this is one of the ways we respond to all these events that are taking place. Okay. Being it's also Parshas Chukas, like I mentioned, let's talk a bit about that. So Parshas Chukas, as I said, the connection to Gimmel Tammuz is very clear. You have both the challenge, tumas mes, which is the impurity, the toxins of separation of body and soul, but you also have the Tara. Shivrei B'tzidei, the Tara B'tzidei, Magdim Refu Lamaka in a way, that by bringing together the forces of Rotze and Shuv, tension and resolution, yearning and return, which essentially encompasses all of Torah mitzvahs, as the Alter Rebbe says in Likutei Torah Parshas Chukas, which means Araveda. So we bring together Neshama and Guf, and that's why Yemesa Moshiach and Tchias HaMesim is totally b'maseinu v'avedesenu, as the Alter Rebbe says, beginning of chapter 37 in Tanya. Because maseinu v'avedesenu corrects and repairs all the schisms and dissonance and separations between body and soul in every other way. So is the tikkun for the period of tumas mes, of the separation that happens where the soul and body are disconnected, and the soul, eternal soul, goes on, continues its journey, but not in the body, but to bring it back to Tchias HaMesim, where body and soul will be returned. Once you repair the punctures, so Neshama and Guf can be lived together side by side forever, Chaim Nitzchim, in Tchias HaMesim. As the Ramban Paskins will be the ultimate reward, a total peace, total harmony between body and soul, between the physical and material, and the spiritual. And Adira b'tachtenim, Adira le'yizbara b'tachtenim, that this physical world will be a forever home, comfortable home, for Atzmusi Yizbarach, as Chassidus explains. So that's a general connection to Chukas. But the very name Chukas, as we know, means Zeis Chukas HaTeira, means it goes in the category of suprarational law. There's Mishpatim Eidus Chukim, 3 different names for mitzvahs. Mishpatim are the rational laws, like tzedakah, that even a human would come up with the idea of basic morality. Eidus are commemorative mitzvahs, like Shabbos, Yom Tov. So we may not come up with, but we can understand it. You commemorate something with a holiday. When we left Mitzrayim, Pesach, and so on. Chukim is l'mayla metam v'das. Parah Aduma is the classic chukah. Why dafka Parah Aduma, red heifer? Because Hashem said so. Someone asks the question, What is the connection between suprarational laws and engraved letters? Because chukah also comes from the word chukah chakakti gzeira gazarti, a chukah, a rule that I engraved. So it's like from the word chukah, similar to in bechukesai telechu, as the maamarim explain, engraved. Both interpretations of the word chukas. What's the connection? So in Chassidus it explains that Rebbe brings it in a number of places, because when it's a rational law, or even one that makes sense, purely based on rational, if the rational argument changes a bit, then you could say the commitment to that law changes. It's like Avid Tluya B'Dovid. It's a love that's not ulterior, that has an ulterior motive, so to speak, a reason. Chukah means it's engraved. When something is engraved, it's immutable, unchangeable. It's engraved in the very essence of something. So chukah captures that connection to Hashem. But that's why we're told that mishpatim and edus also have an element of chukah. The Frierdiker Rebbe brings that in maamar. The Rebbe cites it. Because even though they're rational laws that make sense, but the truth is, every mitzvah is really a chukah because the Eibishter said so. However, some mitzvahs, some mislabish, manifest in logic as well. And the same thing, chukim also have some explanations, even though fundamentally they're beyond, which is really the essence of everything. Everything is beyond rational because the Eibishter is not defined by the logic that he created. But he wanted that suprarational state should manifest in the rational. So mishpatim, it's very much manifest, in edus less so, and chukim even less so. So you want to have all levels. A connection to Hashem simply because Hashem said so. I feel lachta veitzim. I feel in this tavinu lachta veitzim, the Alter Rebbe brings in Likutei Torah. Even if he told us to chop wood, we do it. That's Hashem's chukah chakakti. It's engraved because Hashem said so. And then there are mitzvahs that are connected, that are manifest more in a primistic way, integrated and internalized also in our logic. And that's the connection. So there's that element of that immutable leishanisi that comes after from engraved. And of course, in Avedis Hashem, there's Eisi Saksiva, the written letters. So even though the ink is on the parchment, but they're two different entities, and it could be ultimately, it could be separated, could get erased, get broken. A chukah is engraved letters in stone. It's engraved, it's part of the stone itself. Yes, it could be filled up with dust, but the letters always remain. They're part of the very etzem. So our connection through that is thorough, through and through. In Eishis Achkika itself, Chassidus brings this chkika that doesn't go through and through the stone, and then there's chkika like the luches, the tablets that Moshe received from Hashem, where the letters are through and through. And that's even a deeper level of connection. Next question. What can we learn from the story of Moshe hitting the rock instead of speaking to it? And can that be applied to knowing the best direction of dealing with the genocidal threats of Iran and their terrorist proxy groups? Would it be a better course of action to speak to them instead of hitting them? Okay. So the story, of course, is in this week's Parsha. Hashem says to speak to the rock, to draw out water from it, and Moshe speaks. It didn't work, so he hits the rock like it was the first time when Hashem told him, and it did draw water. And for this, Moshe would be punished for changing. And in a sense, on his level, Kiddush Hashem, that the Yidden saw that he changed, that Hashem said speak, and he's hit the rock. So for anyone else, hitting a rock is just as much amunah as speaking to a rock. Try it out. Both of them don't draw water from a rock naturally. But for Moshe to change even one word is already a big thing. Because Moshe is Moshe Rabbeinu. The higher standard, like the Gemara says about a Nameira or Tana, that would not buy meat on credit, even though that's perfectly legitimate. Because he didn't want anyone to think that he took the meat and didn't pay for it. So it's how people perceive a certain person on the level that they are. They have to live up to a higher standard. The Rebbe would often say that when you're a mashpia, a teacher, you have to do twice as much as what you expect from your students, because they will always look at you and say, okay, what my teacher said, I'll do half of it or part of it. So that's one point. But what is the significance? So the Maimorim talk about. A rock represents an Evan, Leva Evan, a heart of stone, when a person is hard to penetrate. So what's the best way to reach someone who seems to be blocked? For whatever reason. Is it through speaking through them and slowly melting their heart, melting the stone? Or do you have to hit the stone? So the first time Moshe hit the stone, because the first time, sometimes you need something to shock treatment, so to speak. But then Hashem said, but the real method is Yamin Mekareves, through love. Through a soft approach. Now, does that mean there's never a reason to have discipline and a more like hitting? We're not talking about physically hitting, but more aggressive approach. Of course, that's at times necessary, but that's not the standard. That's not what you should shoot for. Meaning that's not what you should begin with. You talk. Comes to Iran, how could you apply that? Iran with threats? You're talking about a mortal enemy. You're supposed to mobilize even on Shabbos, even if we're not sure that they're coming to attack. As Pekuach Nefesh. Pekuach Nefesh, these rules don't apply. You do it as necessary to be done. Then perhaps if you see that an enemy is ready to change their position, they're ready to recognize Israel, they're ready to put down their arms, and you know they're sincere, and you prove that they're sincere, then yes, of course there's no reason to go attack. And you speak. But this is talking about the general principle of how we reach people. With kindness. Benachas nishma. In a pleasant way. Words from the heart enter the heart. Okay, let's talk about two more things, timely things. Someone asked the question, how should we react to the nomination of an anti-Israel, anti-Semitic New York mayoral candidate? So just the other day, there was the elections for the nominee candidate for the Democratic Party, and an individual like that, who has actually blatantly and openly speaks about anti-Israel, his feelings, not even recognizing Eretz Yisrael. So a lot of people are shaken up by it. So generally speaking, our approach is we're not people who are afraid or tremble. Even if something doesn't go the way we think it should go, our approach always has to be with strength and fortitude. So someone asked the question, what would the Rebbe advise? Here's how one person wrote it. We are our own worst enemy. New York City is closer to electing a jihadist, socialist, anti-Semite mayor, and one of the reasons is socialist groups, and including some Jews, that voted for him. Can you imagine if in the 1930s there were groups in Berlin there were Jews called for Chmach Shemai. It could get so bad if he's elected that if someone calls 911 and says, I'm being assaulted, please send the police, and the 911 operator will reply, I don't even want to say what this person writes, that you deserve it because you're a Zionistic white colonial settler on stolen indigenous land. So what would the Rebbe advise us to do? Should we all leave New York City while we still can? Absolutely not. The Rebbe's advice would always be that we are Yidden, we're connected to Hashem, let's do whatever we can to get the right nominee elected. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, Hashem runs the world, and we've had, unfortunately, very bad leaders in the world. And yet we've survived them all. Our approach always has to be positive. Again, politically and financially and other ways, obviously, do whatever you can to get the right official in there. That's best, not just for Jews, because it's not good for Jews, it's not good for anyone, let's be honest. But someone that's the appropriate candidate. But to be afraid, to have that type of fear, no. Especially living in a country, a free country. So I know some people, I guess I'm more in the paranoid group, would say, look, in the past we've seen terrible things happen. I would not believe that Rebbe would alarm us in that fashion. As far as moving out of New York, look at the Rebbe in Crown Heights, even in the dark days when I was a younger child, and Crown Heights, Jews were leaving, and there was crime, and there was a lot of negative things, the Rebbe stood fast. Same thing with South Africa when they went through their domestic situations, and many Jews left. The Rebbe told people, do not leave. Eretz Yisrael, when people felt wasn't safe. No, everywhere. Mamish pekuach nefesh is another story. But generally speaking, we don't retreat. We build. We become stronger. So again, the answer is, of course, do whatever we need to do to get the right official elected as mayor. But not to have any type of feelings, like we spoke earlier, of threat or other other concerns. So we have to be vigilant, but also with strength, positive. And our good an approach in that fashion will overcome all our challenges and all our enemies. And above all, we're also in a state where we're literally on the threshold of Geula. So yes, there's some setbacks. Sometimes right before the dawn, there can be a certain amount of darkness. But overall, there's much to thank Hashem for. And the Bikush HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Chizkiah Moshiach, so the Rebbe, so the Gemara says, because Chizkiah didn't say thank you. So I think it's important, and I want to conclude with that, to say thank you to Hashem for the miracles, praying to Hashem for continued miracles, and for the coming of the Geula. But I'll actually conclude with one final question. What lessons can we learn from the recent heat wave in New York and the East Coast? Well, in general, it says in the Svarim, the Chassidus, Maamarim say that in the times of the summer months, when it's warmer, it's easier to serve Hashem. Shemesh Amagan Hashem Elikim. So maybe extreme heat is a reflection of more revelation of the Shemesh. But on the other hand, we also know that it's dangerous and it's oppressive. So besides learning for Eiros and Avedus Hashem, obviously we have to protect ourselves. And it's also part of a wake-up call. Part of the whole wake-up call of Yitaka B'Shefer Gadol of our times. We need to have the right balance between warmth and an average temperature. But again, extreme warmth, remember it says Moshiach comes, Meitzi Chama Min Arteika, the Eibush will take the sun out of its sheath, so it will really be warm. But it'll be a positive warmth, only with positive goals. How will those sensitive to heat move to Israel? Isn't Israel even harder? Fair-skinned, it's Eastern European Ashkenazi Jews who can't survive with oppressive heat. So with 102 degrees in New York for 3 days in a row, how will everyone move to Eretz Yisrael, which is even hotter? I wouldn't worry about that, because the same Eibishter that sends the heat also sends us ways to protect ourselves from any dangerous effects of the heat and only draw the positive elements. The bottom line is, when it's cold, we have to warm it up. When it's too hot, we have to cool it down. That's Rotzei V'Shuv, Mayim and Eish, the theme of this week's Parsha, that brings Chayis and Chayim Nitzchim. May we be zeichet to all of that, especially throughout your Futzah Meinesecha Chutza. The Eibishter should bless us as we enter the month of Tammuz. We experience Tammuz is also a month of heat, and it has negative applications, but we transform it all into positive things. And we'll be zeichet to the Gula Mitzvahs V'Ashleim and the complete Nitzachon over our enemies. And we can march into the Gula together with the Rebbe. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Everyone be well and kol tuv.
This program is brought to you by MyLife Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at chassidusapply.com/donate.